Failure is loud, it announces itself. It crashes into your life and demands to be seen. Progress is quiet. It whispers. It moves slowly, often when no one is paying attention. There are many overnight tragedies. They arrive without warning. A market collapses. A company fails. A life changes in a moment. But overnight miracles, they're rare, almost invisible. Success doesn't explode into existence. It accumulates patiently, silently. That's why crashes dominate the news, why fear spreads faster than understanding, why panic feels urgent, and patience feels optional. Slow improvement happens in the background, day after day. While headlines move on, it doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't interrupt your feed, not because things aren't getting better, but because better doesn't shout. Better takes time, and time doesn't make noise. And if you're still here, still moving forward, still showing up when nothing feels dramatic, when there's no applause, no recognition, no immediate reward, when progress feels slow and doubt feels loud, remember this: silence doesn't mean failure. It often means growth. And if you're still standing, still trying, still patient, you're probably doing better than you think. And once you understand why progress stays invisible for so long, you begin to see money not as numbers, but as human behavior. Money is often treated like a math problem, something precise, objective, predictable, numbers, spreadsheets, percentages, models that assume if we follow the rules, the outcome should make sense. But money rarely behaves the way math expects it to, not because the math is wrong, but because people are involved, and people are not equations. The most important financial decisions are almost never made in moments of clarity. They're made in moments of uncertainty, at dinner tables, late at night, when the numbers stop feeling abstract and start feeling personal, when a decision isn't just about return, but about fear, about safety, about not wanting to feel foolish or repeat a mistake from the past. We like to believe we're rational with money, that we analyze the data, compare options, and calmly choose what makes sense, but emotion almost always arrives first. Logic follows later. Fear reacts instantly. Greed disguises itself as confidence, and regret quietly shapes future decisions. We don't respond to money itself. We respond to what money represents: security, status, freedom, or failure. The same dollar can feel empowering to one person and suffocating to another, because money is never experienced in isolation. It's experienced through memory, through upbringing, through environment. Two people can look at the same numbers, the same opportunity, the same risk, and walk away with completely different decisions, not because one is smarter, but because each is protecting something different. One may be protecting growth, another may be protecting survival. When it comes to money, context matters more than intelligence, experience matters more than theory, and behavior matters more than knowledge. That's why smart people can make terrible financial decisions, and why others quietly succeed without ever sounding impressive, because knowing what to do and being able to do it are two very different things. Especially under pressure, especially when uncertainty is high, money has a unique ability to amplify emotion. A little fear becomes panic, a little confidence becomes recklessness, and a little success distorts judgment. When it comes to money, we are not blank slates. We carry our past into every decision, the losses we remember, the wins we're afraid to lose, and the expectations placed on us. Education helps, tools help, advice helps, but none of it matters if behavior collapses under pressure, because financial success is rarely about knowing the right answer. It's about being able to live with it, to endure uncertainty, to resist impulse and stay consistent, even when progress feels invisible. And once you understand that, you stop asking, "What's the smartest move?" and start asking, "Why do I react the way I do when money is involved?" Every one of us grows up in a different world, different homes, different incomes, different fears, different definitions of what enough even means. We like to think money rules are universal, that there's one right way to save, one right way to invest, one correct answer for everyone. But money doesn't work that way, because people don't grow up the same way. Some people grew up watching money disappear, jobs lost, businesses fail, bills stack up. Others grew up watching money grow, promotions, investments, opportunity after opportunity. Those early experiences leave marks, not on paper, but on behavior, on how safe risk feels, on how painful loss feels, on how patient someone can afford to be. Two people can hear the same financial advice: invest for the long term, take calculated risks, don't panic, and react in completely opposite ways, because advice isn't filtered through logic first. It's filtered through experience, through childhood, through environment, through the world someone learned to survive in. Think about generations. Someone who grew up during long periods of inflation learns that prices rise, that savings lose value, that stability is fragile. Someone who grew up during booming markets learns that patience is rewarded, that investing works, that optimism feels rational. Neither worldview is foolish, neither is wrong. They're responses to different realities, the years when we first notice. Money, when we watch adults talk about it, argue about it, worry about it, those years quietly shape how we think money behaves, long before we ever manage our own. People don't make financial decisions based on perfect information. They make them based on what they've seen before, on what worked, on what failed, on what hurt, and on what they're afraid of repeating. That's why people can justify almost any financial decision, even bad ones, because in their personal story, it makes sense. It aligns with what they believe the world does next. This is what creates so much disagreement about money, why one person sees opportunity, while another sees danger, why one person sees patience, while another sees risk, and why both feel confident they're right, because they're not reacting to the same world, they're reacting to the one they remember. Everyone has a financial past, and that past quietly writes rules, rules we follow without realizing they exist. You could call this financial DNA. It's not something you choose, it's something you inherit, and unless you recognize it, it will quietly make decisions for you, long before logic ever gets a vote. When people make strange decisions with money, it's easy to dismiss them, to say they're reckless or irrational or simply bad with money, but that judgment misses something important. People do some crazy things with money, but no one is actually crazy, because every financial decision makes sense to the person making it. At the moment they make it, decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They're made using the information available at the time, filtered through personal experience, fear, memory, and belief. When someone refuses to invest, they're not always being ignorant. They may be protecting themselves from a loss they've already lived through. When someone takes extreme risks, they're not always being greedy. They may be chasing an opportunity they believe won't come again. People don't act based on objective truth. They act based on their version of reality, a version shaped by past outcomes and reinforced by survival. That's why two people can look at the same market, same price, the same chart, and feel completely different emotions. One sees danger, another sees opportunity. Both feel justified, because both are responding to what they believe comes next, and that belief was earned, not imagined. People justify their financial decisions using the information they have and the mental model they carry of how the world works. That model didn't appear randomly. It was built, passed down, reinforced over years, through parents, through peers, through culture, through the events they witnessed firsthand. Even bad decisions often feel reasonable in context, because they align with a personal story, a story about risk, about safety, about what happens when things go wrong or when they go right. This is why financial arguments rarely change minds, because you're not arguing about numbers, you're arguing about experience, about history, about identity, and identity doesn't change easily. There is no universally correct way to manage money, only ways that work within certain contexts, at certain times, for certain people. What looks reckless to one person looks cautious to another. What looks patient to one looks irresponsible to someone else. That doesn't mean one person is broken. It means they learn different rules, rules written by different experiences. When you accept that, something important changes. You stop trying to copy other people's decisions and start paying attention to your own behavior. You stop asking, why would anyone do that? And start asking, what experiences led them there? And just as importantly, what experiences led me here? Because understanding money isn't about finding the perfect strategy. It's about understanding the story you're acting out and whether that story still serves you. Once you understand that money is behavior, and that behavior is shaped by experience. One truth becomes impossible to ignore: time matters more than almost anything else. When people talk about great investors, they usually focus on intelligence or strategy or skill, but they often miss the simplest factor: longevity. One of the most successful investors in history didn't just invest well, he invested for an unusually long time. Most of his wealth was not built early, it came later, much later, after decades of staying in the game. This is the quiet power of compounding. Compounding doesn't need brilliance, it needs patience, it needs consistency, and most of all, it needs time. Compounding works slowly at first, almost invisibly. Progress feels disappointing, returns feel small, and that's exactly why most people give up too early. They underestimate how powerful time becomes when it's allowed to work uninterrupted. A small return, reinvested, grows not just on the original amount, but on everything it has already earned, and then on that again and again. What looks modest in the beginning becomes extraordinary in the end, but only if nothing interrupts the process, and interruption is the enemy of compounding. Panic, impatience, the urge to chase something new, the temptation to quit when progress feels slow. Compounding rewards those who can endure boredom, who can stay calm while others react, who can remain invested while the world tells them to do something, anything, just not nothing. This is why time often matters more than talent. Someone with average returns over a very long period can outperform someone with exceptional returns over a short one. The difference isn't intelligence, it's endurance, the ability to keep going, to stay invested, to let time do the heavy lifting. Compounding doesn't announce itself, it doesn't feel exciting, it doesn't offer quick validation. It quietly rewards those who respect it and punishes those who underestimate it. This is why the greatest fortunes are often built slowly, over decades, not years, and why the most powerful advantage in money isn't intelligence or access or timing, it's simply staying in the game. If compounding rewards patience, then this question naturally follows: why isn't the most skilled investor always the richest one? Because skill and outcome are not the same thing. Skill determines how well you play the game. Time determines how long you're allowed to play it. And time has a way of overpowering almost everything else. There are investors who have achieved extraordinary returns, year after year, far higher than most people ever will. Their skill is undeniable. Their results impressive, but skill alone doesn't compound. Only time does. Someone who starts early and stays consistent, even with modest returns, can quietly surpass someone far more talented who arrives later or leaves sooner. Because compounding doesn't care about brilliance, it cares about duration. A few exceptional years can't compete with decades of consistency, not because the returns aren't high enough, but because they don't have enough time to stack. This is uncomfortable to accept because it means outcomes aren't purely merit-based, that success isn't always a reward for being the best. Sometimes it's a reward for being early and patient, and able to stay alive in the game long enough for time to do its work. This doesn't make skill irrelevant. Skill still matters, but it matters differently than most people think. Skill helps you avoid mistakes that end the game early. It helps you survive downturns, manage risk, and stay invested when it's hardest to do so. But even the greatest skill can't make up for lost time. Years not invested can never be recovered, and years invested late never compound the same way as years invested early. This is why two people with wildly different abilities can end up with outcomes that seem backwards. The less impressive one appears to win, not because they were smarter, but because they started sooner and stayed longer. Time is the quiet multiplier. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show progress evenly, and it doesn't reward impatience. It simply accumulates day after day, year after year, and eventually, it overwhelms everything else. This is the uncomfortable truth behind many fortunes. They weren't built by being perfect. They were built by not stopping, by staying invested, staying alive, and giving time enough room to work. If time is the quiet advantage, then pessimism is the voice that convinces people not to wait. Pessimism feels intelligent. It sounds cautious, responsible, grounded in reality. optimism. By contrast, often sounds naive, unrealistic, even foolish, especially when money is involved. This is because pessimism deals in immediate threats, loss, decline, failure, things that can happen quickly and demand attention right now. Optimism deals in long-term progress, growth, improvement, compounding, things that take years, sometimes decades. And the human brain isn't built to trust slow rewards. We are wired to react to danger, not to wait patiently for gradual improvement. That's why bad news spreads instantly, and good news, when it comes slowly, often goes unnoticed. A sudden market crash commands attention, headlines, panic, emergency responses, but years of steady gains rarely feel dramatic, rarely feel newsworthy. There are many overnight tragedies, but very few overnight miracles, and because of that, pessimism feels like realism, while optimism feels like wishful thinking, even when the long-term evidence quietly supports it. This bias shapes financial behavior in subtle ways. People sell after losses, not because the future is doomed, but because fear feels urgent. People hesitate to invest, not because investing doesn't work, but because waiting is uncomfortable. Progress requires patience, and patience doesn't come with emotional rewards. You don't feel smart being patient. You don't feel validated. You feel exposed. You feel uncertain. And pessimism offers relief from that discomfort. It gives you a reason to act, to protect, to step away, to say, "I saw it coming." Optimism asks something harder. It asks you to accept setbacks, to endure volatility, to sit with uncertainty, without immediate proof that you're right. That's why pessimism sounds smarter in the short term. It explains fear, it justifies inaction, and it feels emotionally safe. But over long periods of time, optimism is often the better bet. Not blind optimism, not reckless optimism, but the belief that progress, while slow and uneven, tends to move forward. And though who can tolerate that slowness are the ones who stay long enough for time to matter. Pessimism protects you from short-term pain, but optimism quietly rewards those willing to wait. Optimism keeps you in the game, and pessimism pulls you out too early. Then luck and risk decide what happens while you're playing. We like to believe success is earned in a straight line. Work hard, make smart decisions, get rewarded. But real life doesn't work that cleanly, because outcomes are never controlled by effort alone. They're influenced by chance, timing, circumstance, events no one can predict or repeat. Luck and risk are inseparable. They are two sides of the same coin. Luck is what happens when things go unexpectedly right. Risk is what happens when they go unexpectedly wrong, and neither can be fully avoided, no matter how smart you are or how careful you try to be. Success stories often highlight talent, discipline, vision, but they quietly leave out something uncomfortable: timing, being in the right place at the right moment, with the right opportunity. Consider how rare those combinations actually are. Millions of people work hard, millions are intelligent, millions are disciplined, yet only a handful end up in extraordinary positions, not because others failed, but because randomness plays a larger role than we admit. Luck doesn't cancel effort, it amplifies it, and risk doesn't negate talent, it exposes its limits. Two people can make equally smart decisions. One succeeds, one fails, not because one deserved it more, but because chance intervened. This makes success hard to reverse engineer, because what worked once under specific conditions, at a specific time, may not work again. That's why blindly copying success is dangerous. You inherit the strategy, but not the luck that surrounded it, and you inherit the risk without knowing where it's hidden. Luck and risk move quietly. They don't announce themselves. You often only recognize them in hindsight, after the outcome is already decided. This is why humility matters in finance, why overconfidence is fragile, and why resilience often matters more than brilliance. When you accept the role of luck, you stop assuming success proves superiority and failure proves incompetence. You begin to see outcomes for what they are: a mix of effort, behavior, time, and randomness. And once you see that, you manage money differently. You leave room for error, you prepare for uncertainty, and you avoid building strategies that only work if nothing goes wrong. To understand how powerful luck and risk really are, you don't need theory, you need a story. In the late 1960s, there were hundreds of millions of high school-aged students in the world. Only a tiny fraction of them had access to a computer. At that time, computers were rare, expensive, and almost completely inaccessible to young people. But at one small school in Seattle, something unusual happened. The school leased a computer, a powerful machine for its time, the kind of technology even most universities didn't have. Out of hundreds of millions of students worldwide, only a few hundred attended that school, and among them was a young student with a deep curiosity for computers. That student was Bill Gates. Gates was intelligent, driven, obsessive about learning, but so were others, including a close friend and fellow computer prodigy, Kent Evans, just as curious, just as talented, just as ambitious. Both had access to the same rare opportunity. Both were building skills far ahead of their time, but only one would go on to change the world, not because one worked harder, not because one was smarter, but because luck and risk intervened. Kent Evans died in a mountaineering accident before he graduated high school, an extremely rare event, a one-in-a-million kind of outcome, the same scale of rarity that allowed Gates to gain early access to a computer. One rare event created extraordinary opportunity. Another rare event erased it entirely. This is the uncomfortable truth about success. Luck and risk are siblings. You don't get one without the other. They move together, quietly, unpredictably, like wind and waves guiding a sailboat. You can control the rudder, adjust the sails, make good decisions, but you cannot control the wind or the storms or the direction they come from. Success often looks intentional in hindsight, but lived forward, it's fragile, conditional, and exposed to forces no one controls. Recognizing this doesn't diminish achievement, it reframes it. It replaces arrogance with humility and judgment with perspective. When you account for luck and risk, you stop assuming outcomes are fully deserved or fully earned, and you start managing money with more caution, more resilience, and more respect for uncertainty. Because talent matters, effort matters, behavior matters, but none of them operate in isolation. And forgetting that is how people build strategies that only work when nothing goes wrong. Once you accept the role of luck and risk, the question changes. It's no longer just, how do I make more money? It becomes, what is money supposed to do for me? Most people pursue wealth believing it will make them happier, more income, more possessions, more status, more proof that they've succeeded. But happiness doesn't respond to money the way we expect it to. Beyond a certain point, more money stops changing how we feel day to day. What matters far more is control. Control over your time, control over your choices, control over who you spend your life with, and how you spend your days. True happiness isn't about luxury. It's about flexibility, the ability to say no, the ability to walk away, the ability to choose. Money becomes powerful, not when it buys more things, but when it buys you options, the freedom to decide what matters and what doesn't. Many people become wealthier, yet feel less in control than ever. They earn more, but owe more, work harder, but own less of their time. They chase income, while quietly sacrificing freedom. That trade-off often goes unnoticed, until years have passed and the cost becomes clear, because the highest dividend money pays is not comfort or prestige or luxury. It's control. Control over your life and control over your time. Pursuing money without valuing time is like filling a bucket with a hole in it. No matter how much you pour in, it never feels full. Wealth without time feels empty, and success without freedom feels fragile. When money is used to reduce anxiety, to increase flexibility, to buy time instead of status, it begins to serve its real purpose, not as a scoreboard, but as a tool that supports the life you want, rather than controlling it. Once you understand what money is for, you start to notice something else. Outcomes are not evenly distributed. In investing, in business, in careers, or in life, a small number of events often account for the majority of results. These are known as tail events, rare, extreme, disproportionate. They sit at the far edges of probability, but they quietly drive everything. Most decisions you make will not change your life. They'll matter a little or not at all, but a few Decisions, a few moments, a few opportunities, will shape outcomes far beyond their size. This is uncomfortable because it means being wrong most of the time is normal, and being right occasionally can be enough. Consider how success often looks in hindsight: clean, linear, predictable, but lived forward. It's messy, uneven, filled with false starts. Most investments don't work. Most ideas don't pay off. Most efforts lead nowhere. And yet, a single outlier can. Years of mediocrity. This is why diversification matters, not because you expect everything to succeed, but because you don't know which few things will. Tail events are invisible while they're forming. They don't announce themselves. They often look like mistakes or distractions or wasted effort, until suddenly they're not. When people judge outcomes, they focus on the winners, the finished product, the visible success. What they don't see are the countless failures that came before it. The experiments that didn't work, the attempts that went nowhere, the time that felt wasted. Tail events reward those who stay exposed, those who keep showing up, even when results are uneven, even when progress feels random. This is why consistency matters, not because it guarantees success, but because it keeps you in the game long enough for a few meaningful outcomes to emerge. Accepting tail events changes how you think about failure. Being wrong doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're participating. Losses don't invalidate the process, they're part of it. When you understand that a small number of moments drive most outcomes, you stop expecting perfection and start building systems that can survive being wrong, because in a world driven by tails, endurance matters more than accuracy. If tail events drive most outcomes, then being right most of the time isn't required or even realistic. This runs against how we're taught to think. We're trained to believe success comes from accuracy, from minimizing mistakes, from avoiding being wrong. But in domains driven by long tails, accuracy matters far less than endurance. Great outcomes don't come from being perfect. They come from staying exposed long enough for a few decisions to matter enormously. Most investments fail. Most ideas don't work. Most attempts lead nowhere. That isn't incompetence. It's the base rate. Success simply requires that the few wins are allowed to outweigh the many losses. This is uncomfortable because being wrong feels personal. It feels like evidence of failure or lack of intelligence. But in reality, being wrong is part of the system, not a signal to stop. Consider how many decisions go unnoticed because they didn't change anything. They neither helped nor hurt. They simply passed, and yet we judge ourselves harshly based on those moments, ignoring the fact that only a handful of decisions will ever matter materially. Winning more often than you lose is not the goal. Losing in ways that don't end the game is, because one catastrophic mistake can erase years of progress, while dozens of small mistakes often don't matter at all. This is why risk management matters more than prediction, why survival matters more than brilliance, and why humility beats confidence over long periods of time. Good decision makers don't aim to be right constantly. They aim to avoid being wiped out. They accept small losses, learn from them, and stay alive long enough for tail events to do their work. This shifts how you view success. You stop obsessing over each individual outcome and start focusing on the process, whether it allows you to continue, whether it compounds, whether it survives bad luck. Being wrong stops feeling like failure and starts feeling like tuition, the price you pay to stay in the game in a world where a few moments decide everything. Once you understand that being right all the time isn't necessary to win, a different question appears. What does winning actually look like? We often confuse being rich with being wealthy. They are not the same thing. Being rich is visible. It shows up in income, in purchases, in status, in what people can see. Wealth is invisible. It exists in what hasn't been spent yet, in financial assets quietly waiting in the background. True wealth is the gap between what you have and what you choose not to spend. This is why appearances are misleading. A flashy lifestyle doesn't require wealth. It requires cash flow, and often debt. It's easy to assume someone driving an expensive car or living in a large home is financially secure, but spending is not a signal of wealth. It's often the opposite, because money that's been spent no longer has any power. Wealth is built through restraint, through patience, through the discipline to say no to things that look impressive today but cost freedom tomorrow. The hardest part of building wealth is that it's hidden. You don't get applause for saving. You don't get recognition for investing quietly. You don't get admiration for what you choose not to buy. That makes wealth difficult to imitate because you can't see it, and because we're conditioned to believe that having money means spending it. But the truth is, the only way to be wealthy is to not spend the money you have. Every luxury declined, every impulse resisted, every upgrade passed on quietly adds to wealth, while visible consumption quietly subtracts from it. This doesn't mean wealth requires deprivation. It means wealth requires intention, knowing which expenses support your life and which only inflate your image. True wealth isn't about impressing others. It's about building a margin of safety, a buffer between you and uncertainty. And that buffer is what allows flexibility, calm, and control. When money is quiet, when it's not being announced through purchases, that's often when it's doing its most important work. Once you understand the difference between being rich and being wealthy, another truth becomes clear. Nothing worthwhile in markets comes for free. We like to think of investing as numbers, returns, percentages, charts moving upward over time. But the real price of investing is not paid in dollars. It's paid in discomfort, volatility, uncertainty, doubt. These are not flaws in the system. They are the admission fee. If you want higher returns, you must accept a rougher ride. There is no path to long-term growth that avoids temporary losses. Just as there is no mountain peak without a difficult climb from a distance. The path looks obvious, straightforward, predictable. But once you're climbing, the weather changes, the terrain shifts. You question whether you chose the right route. And yet, you never expect a golden escalator to appear. You understand the struggle is the cost. Investing is no different. Many people believe they can earn market returns without paying the emotional price. They search for certainty, for strategies that promise safety without sacrifice, but that's like wanting the reward without accepting the risk. If you want higher returns, you must accept that prices will fall, sometimes sharply, sometimes unexpectedly, and often at the worst possible moment. This volatility feels like punishment, but it's not. It's the market's fee, the cost of participation, attempting to avoid that fee by jumping in and out, timing every move or chasing certainty is like trying to steal from the market. It might work once or twice, but eventually, the price is collected. History shows this clearly. Long-term returns exist, but they come attached to long stretches of discomfort, declines, drawdowns, periods where patience feels irrational. The real challenge of investing isn't finding the best strategy. It's convincing yourself that the price is worth paying, because once you see volatility as the cost of admission, not a sign of failure, you stop fighting the process and start enduring it. Successful investing isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing which pain you're willing to live with, short-term discomfort or long-term regret. Once you accept that volatility is the price, another temptation appears, the temptation to avoid paying it. Many people believe they can earn market returns without enduring market discomfort. They search for timing, for signals, for strategies that promise upside without downside. But markets don't work that way. Every return has a cost, and every attempt to bypass that cost carries its own risk. Imagine wanting a car. You have three choices. You can buy a new one, pay the full price, and accept what it costs. You can buy a used one, cheaper, with fewer guarantees, or you can try to steal one, avoiding the price entirely. Most people understand instinctively that stealing the car comes with consequences, and yet in markets, many believe option 3 exists. They try to steal returns, timing tops, dodging crashes, jumping in at the perfect moment, jumping out just before pain arrives. Sometimes it works, once, maybe twice, and that success is dangerous because it creates confidence, not skill. Over time, markets collect their fee. Missed rebounds, mistimed exits, compounding interrupted. The cost doesn't show up immediately, but it accumulates quietly, just like returns do. The irony is, those trying hardest to avoid risk often end up taking the most dangerous kind, the risk of not being invested. When when progress resumes, because the biggest gains often arrive unexpectedly after periods of fear. When optimism feels foolish, you don't get rewarded for predicting the future, you get rewarded for staying exposed to it. Markets don't punish patience. They punish the illusion of control, the belief that you can outsmart uncertainty. Instead of enduring it, accepting that you can't steal from the market is freeing, because it shifts your focus from cleverness to resilience, from prediction to preparation, and from short-term comfort to long-term survival. Even when people succeed financially, something strange often happens. The finish line moves. What once felt like enough suddenly isn't. This is known as the hedonic treadmill, the tendency to adapt, to raise expectations and reset desires as soon as a goal is reached. A higher income, a bigger home, a better lifestyle feels exciting at first, then ordinary, then insufficient. So the chase begins again. More money, more success, more validation, always just out of reach. This is how people with everything still feel unsatisfied, not because they lack opportunity, but because they never decided what enough meant. Without a clear definition of enough, there is no finish line, only motion, endless, exhausting. Some of the most dramatic financial failures didn't come from desperation. They came from excess, from people who already had more than they needed, but kept going, not out of necessity, but out of habit, or ego, or fear of falling behind. Tragedy of the hedonic treadmill is not that ambition exists, it's that ambition never rests. Enough becomes a moving target, and happiness is postponed indefinitely. Knowing when enough is not a lack of ambition, it's a form of wisdom. It means recognizing that money is a tool, not a scorecard, and that the purpose of wealth is not endless accumulation, but support for a life you can actually enjoy, the ability to stop, to slow down, to choose contentment over comparison, because without a sense of enough, even success becomes fragile, and no amount of money will ever feel like it's finally enough. Money is not a finish line, it's not proof, it's not a scorecard, and it's not a measure of worth. It's a tool, one that quietly shapes how we live, how we choose, and how we endure uncertainty. We spend so much time asking, how do I make more, that we forget to ask, what is this all for? Because money doesn't reward intelligence alone, it rewards behavior, patience, humility, and the ability to stay in the game when progress feels invisible. Success is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It compounds quietly over time while no one is watching. And failure is not being wrong or slow or uncertain. Failure is never defining what enough means and spending your life chasing a number that keeps moving further away. When you understand money this way, stop racing others and start designing your own life. You trade noise for clarity, speed for durability, and ego for control, because in the end, wealth isn't what you show, it's what you protect. It's time, choice, and the freedom to decide when enough is finally enough. Capital Lux isn't about getting rich fast, it's about understanding money slowly, so you can build a life you don't need to escape from. If this way of thinking resonates, you can like the video and subscribe to Capital Lux whenever you're ready.